Guys, I want to welcome you to another episode of the Advisory Board podcast, where we talk about key issues and things that franchisors need to understand to grow their business more successfully. I've got with me a good friend of mine, Cyle Adair, who's the CEO and founder of Transcend Translation. He's also a buddy of mine. I came from this industry, of the translation localization industry. So Kyle and I worked together before, and he's worked at several companies that I know. So a super trusted resource here in this world of like, how do I manage language services as a growing franchise brand? So Kyle, tell us a little bit more about yourself. Oh, actually a few things, because he won't brag on himself. Kyle is an incredible dad. He's a great soccer player. He's a captain in the Army, right? Isn't that the rank where you
Yep.
retired?
Yeah, that's what I finished up as captain. Yep.
Yep. So we can call him Captain Kyle if you want. And but not to make light of that, because he's served in how many tours in Iraq?
Did two deployments to Iraq. Yeah.
So Kyle's an incredible guy, all around. But Kyle, tell us a little bit more about yourself and about Transcend Translation, if you don't mind.
Yeah. Yeah. Dave, it's finally good to like get together here. Dave and I have known each other for, oh, geez, we're probably at 7 years, 6 years now.
Yeah.
Yeah. So been a little bit. And Dave, as you mentioned, you were in the translation industry, so you know this stuff very well. So you can call me out, when you're like, oh no, he's got it all wrong. But no, so Transcend Translation, in a sense, we're fairly new. And I think I've mentioned to you this before, Dave, but we're actually we're even though we just hit our 2 year mark. I've been in the industry for many years, and we've been growing extremely fast. We're actually probably some better news will be more official news will be coming out shortly. But probably the major agency Nimitz, they came back and they shared some information where they were sharing about the fastest growing translation companies in the world. And so I shared some financial information with them, and they're like, yeah, we need to include you in the next one, and they will find out end of year. But right now, as of Q1 and of Q2, we happen to be the fastest growing translation company in the world. So it'll become more official here at the end of the year if we can continue to do what we're doing. But it's going very fast and it's very fun. We've been recognized multiple awards just in this year alone. Best state or best translation company in Utah. Good Firms just announced we're the best translation company to work with. And so lots of other things kind of going on, which are a lot of fun. And yeah, it's kind of nice to kind of get the awards and things like that and just kind of receive some validation, because we feel like we're doing really good things for our clients and continue to grow very, very well, and really taking care of them to excel in the global marketplace. Because when we know we do a good job for them, when we do their language translation, that it helps their overall top line revenue, to help them out, which is very fun and exciting for us.
Yeah, and guys, so what does translation have to do with the world of franchising? We're going to talk about that right now. There are a lot of ways that this needs to happen. Like you have, as you're an operator in a small franchise system, you're working in a very local market. This isn't going to be as relevant to you today, but you need to understand the key mechanics here, because as you grow, let's say you want to start franchising in Canada. Oh, now you got to have a franchise agreement in French. You got to have operations manuals in French. Your training materials have to be in French. So like all of these, and there are more, right? Signage and menus, and or if you're a home service company, you maybe your legal agreements, your employment agreements, your handbooks, like all of these things, these resources and assets that are part of your franchise package, they all, as you start to go more international, or you start working in, let's say, southern rim states or major metros where a lot of your employees are non-native English speakers, you're going to find that there's a need for maybe some Spanish translation, some Latin American Spanish translation for your training materials, so your operators day to day can be executing on the franchise processes the same way across the country. You can't leave that up to guesswork, and local translation doesn't work if you want consistent behavior. So this is why I wanted to bring Kyle on, because he's a true expert in this space, and I can definitely validate that. So let's, Kyle, if you don't mind, maybe let's talk about a couple of these key areas. Well, first, let's talk about translation in general. Like, what are some of the big mistakes you see people making as you've been in this industry for so long now that you can help some of these folks avoid?
Yeah. I think the first thing is too, I mean, depending on your franchise and depending on your organization, and before people chime out and go, man, this is too expensive, I don't know if I can do this, can we just kind of wing it with one guy, because I know he speaks a little bit of Spanish, or maybe he can help us out, or I know my cousin's brother knows some Spanish or whatever. There's
Yeah.
usually something like that. Dave, I don't know if the listeners know, if you've shared with them, you speak Spanish fluently, lived in another country that spoke Spanish fluently, and so learned that. Same thing with me. That's how I picked up on my Spanish as well too. A little bit just real quick about my story before I jump into that, because I think it's important. For me, my dad, he was in the Marines for 24 years, so we grew up all over the world. I lived in Japan for 3 years, lived in Argentina for a couple of years. With my deployments personally, when I was in the military, with the Army, 2 deployments to Iraq, and picked up a little bit of Arabic. So I got to kind of go around the world and see how people communicate, how different cultures are. And I just loved it. I thought it was really, really cool. And talk about opposites compared to Japan to Iraq and Kuwait area where I was at, and then compared to Argentina, very, very different. And United States, we feel like it's a good melting pot, but I'm telling you, until you've actually been over those countries, your eyes will really open at that point. And I got to see, particularly when I was one of the many duties that I had in the military, that I was a field artillery officer, and we were going on missions and hunting down bad guys and kind of doing what people think people were doing over in Iraq. But ultimately, one of my job roles as well too, they go, oh, Kyle, he speaks some other languages, I want you to be in charge of the interpreters. So we had 18 different interpreters that would go out on missions with us, and so I helped kind of coordinate, figure that out, found out their skills and what they were well at, what they did well at, and what they didn't do well at as well too. That kind of helped decide what missions they should go on and how we should use them. But also with that, during that time, I got to see, personally, life and death, where if you do good translation or good actually interpretation, how well and how smooth things go. But on the other side, if you have somebody that does poor interpretation or poor translation, things can go very south. And it was a life and death matter sometimes because of that. And it wasn't till later on when I transitioned from the military, and actually at the organization where I met Dave at, that's when it really clicked with me that I thought, man, I think I'm made for this translation world, this translation industry. Doesn't mean I'm awesome personally at translating things. In fact, I have never translated anything. I don't
Yeah.
have quite that skill set. It really is a skill set, even though I'm bilingual. Dave, you're bilingual as well. It's a skill set to do those things. And you realize,
Neither one of us has any business translating documents for
no,
people. Yeah,
no,
yeah, not
yeah.
at all.
It's kind of like, for me, like, doing some framing and drywalling and things like that. I could probably patch it together, but it's not going to look as good as the true professionals doing that. And so you kind of go, yeah, it's probably better to do that. So, anyways, that kind of all led me into the translation industry, and it truly is a passion of mine. And been able to consult with other companies, work at other translation companies as well too. I bring that all up before your audience kind of rolls their eyes and go, oh man, like this is expensive. I think that's the biggest thing that I want to address is most people think like this is a huge endeavor, we have to go all in, we have to do all this stuff, it's going to be so expensive. I want people to know, like, you can do this very cost effectively. And my recommendation, as we've helped out a lot of other organizations, is do baby step by baby step. Don't feel like you have to go all in on a market and do everything. Maybe at first you just translate some landing pages for your website. And when you talk about that, you're talking $100, maybe less, depending on, the cost for or what you're looking at, or how much content that you actually want to translate. But you get some landing pages to see if there's some interest, to get some franchises there. Then maybe the next step is, okay, there's some interest. Now we need to actually get to the FDD and actually have to translate that, which obviously that's going to be a little bit bigger. But maybe you kind of start baby stepping there rather than let's go all in. We got to get all the training material. We got to get all the operating agreement. We got to get the handbooks. We got to get everything. I mean, you can do that, but I recommend doing baby step where you can start seeing already the ROI on that. So when you talk about mistakes, I would say most people that just dive all in thinking like, oh, China sounds like a hot market. Let's go there. Let's go do it. Or, let's go down to Mexico. We got to just dive all in. Take some baby steps first. That's my biggest recommendation.
Mhm. Yeah, and what you're hearing, guys, uh, having been in the industry for quite a while, I think you might have eclipsed me now, Kyle, for how long you've been in the translation industry. I'm pretty sure you're longer now than I have, but I just want to attest, like this doesn't have to be crazy expensive. The challenge that you'll run into is if you call, like, you Google like translation services and talk to some sales exec at some random company, Like you're talking to somebody who his whole job is just to make some money to close a couple of deals and move on to the next deal. And that's why I wanted Kyle to get on here because, and not to prop him up too much. I mean, we don't want to inflate the ego, but like
Don't
Kyle
don't need
also,
don't need the head bigger, you
yeah,
know. So
he's got to turn sideways already to get through doors. But the challenge though is they're not consultative, and Kyle's already giving you some solid advice right now. Like you need to work with a true expert in the space who can strategize how you're going to go into different markets. Kyle's helped lots of people do this. He's worked with guys like I know Caterpillar and huge organizations that we worked on together back in the day, right? So Kyle knows how to do this, and he knows how to do it on a budget, and he knows how to, like, for example, rolling out the basic information pages, rolling out some marketing collateral, rolling out some things before you tackle a 200-page document. Yeah,
yeah,
because you don't even know if you need that 200-page document until you get people interested. But there's more. We're going to come to timelines in a minute because we got to talk about. I remember constantly people would come to me and say, "Hey, I've got this 400-page document. Can you get that to me like next weekend, Dave?" And and I'd say, "Well, yeah, if you want garbage, right? Like if you want like just a straight machine translation with nothing else, like no human intervention." It's gotten better, but we're going to talk about different translation qualities as well, like time frames, qualities. These are things you have to understand as you're trying to figure out how you want to navigate this. But like some franchise systems also put the translation burden back on the buyer. And I'll just tell you right now, that's a good way to lose a deal. If you want to really go into a market and you're like, nah, we don't want to pay for these things to be translated into French. We want to go into Canada. So, but if you want to translate it, you pay for that for yourself. And most people will be turned off by that quite a bit. So you
absolutely.
got to figure out where to start, and it doesn't have to cost you $30,000 to translate everything. You can bite it off a little piece at a time, gauge interest, and then invest more as you need it.
Yeah.
What would you add to that, Kyle?
Yeah, let me talk about, as we advise with different companies. And Dave, I'm glad you bring that up because, like I said, most sales rep at translation companies, they're going to want to just sell, 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 and just try to get you the biggest package and the most expensive and just move forward. And yeah, honestly, probably what they're going to do is probably good quality stuff or whatever. But in my opinion, you don't need to do that. And we're here, and our organization, and I'll say that's probably the biggest reason why we're growing the fastest is because we look at it. And speaking of franchising, in a sense, we look at it. We are the Chick-fil-A of the translation industry. We want exceptional service, is what we want, and we know people will come back when they see the value and they see the quality of what's happening, and they're baby stepping along the way. And we're not going, yeah, you just got to invest 50,000. You have to do that. No, you don't need to do that. Go baby step. You'll see the progression there of how things will work out for your organization.
Yeah,
And maybe if you got money to blow, then yeah, we'd love to help you out and you're trying to meet the end of the year kind of thing. But at the more likely than not, we want to advise you to just baby step in and go, hey, try this out. Let's see what happens for the next 2 months once that landing page is there. Once you've been able to send out some marketing material, what's stirring up? What's not stirring up?
yeah,
Because I will say there's definitely organizations, and Dave, you've had interactions too, where they try that out and they go, oof, yeah, France was not a good market for us. That's not where we need to go. And good thing you only spent, a few $100 or, maybe $1,000 or whatever, depending on how big they wanted to go compared to dropping in 30,000 or $50,000 or whatever needs to take there. I wanted to touch on where things are at. A lot of people, AI, very popular topic right now and what's going on. So I want to touch on some different things there because people are like, we say AI, but there's also machine translation. I think most people are familiar with Google Translate or Microsoft Translator. So those are machine translation engines. And usually when we talk about, there's a blend of quality, cost, and time that we talk about. That's the three-legged stool. Usually you can get two of them. You can't really get the third. You need to decide on that. But the very first step that we talk about, if you're going, hey, we got pennies to literally try to get this done. I got no budget whatsoever. What can we do with that? There is machine translation, Google Translate, Microsoft Translator. We use a proprietary blend of the 9 biggest translation engines, Microsoft, Google, DeepL, and we kind of make a blend there. Not going to lie, at least on our side, the translation quality is just a hair better than all the other translation engines out there. So it's not like a drastic difference. If anybody says they got hey, this is perfect, I'd say beware of that because the technology just is not there yet. But that's the very first one because it's very cheap and it's very fast. And Dave, when you said, hey, someone wants to come in and 400 pages, can I get it done next weekend? that's about the only options that actually is going to be able to work to get it done in that quick of a timeline.
Yeah.
But the
Guys,
quality is not going to be very good.
let me chime in on that for a second, just because there's this, everyone's like all excited about Chat GPT and all this AI stuff. Guys, the language industry is where we developed, like, and helped refine the natural language processing models. Like Kyle and I, we were, what was that, 7 years ago? We were seeing that that was starting to take off in this context of machine translation and you know, and a lot of the translation automation things. So just so you know, not news to us, but also it hasn't gotten that much better. Like it's getting marginally better over time. But there's something about the way we communicate as humans and nuance, and that these machine translations don't capture well. And I'll give you an
Yeah.
example because it's important for you to note this when you, especially when you're in the legal context where every word matters a lot. Machine translation is like a big scary red flag. No, honestly, like you don't want to take your FA and translate it and then deliver it to someone because you're assuming some liability as you do things like that, or your franchise, your FDD. Don't machine translate that and send it out. If you want to send it to someone and that you want them to machine translate it, have them do it. Just so you know, you don't machine translate something then deliver it,
Yeah.
because whatever's in there is what you're agreeing to, and you might not even have any clue what it's saying in there because you're not a native French speaker or Spanish speaker. I'll just tell you, I've seen some of these things go through, and there's a reason why Jimmy Fallon was doing um, like the machine translation music and lyrics, because you take something that's highly nuanced like a song or a contract and you run it through a machine translation engine and then you try to read it and it's laughable. So anyway, I just want to make sure you guys understand, like, these are great tools. You can use them if you have humans touching them and doing post-editive machine translation to clean things up that are like natural linguists. But otherwise, machine translation doesn't have a lot of space, I think, in this world that you guys live in.
Yeah, I mean, you know, you might think that your FDD is super clear and everybody should be able to understand that, but as soon as that franchisee gets that, it's a little bit of German form, and then potentially maybe, hey, they're having a legal team look at it as well too. So, a machine translation, what you can kind of expect from that quality level is it's going to be fuzzy. They're going to understand basically what it's saying, but it's going to be very fuzzy where they're like, I think this is what they're saying, and it's going to be hard for them. So typically our recommendation, and we're very open, it's your company, we just provide options and we advise on it. Typically most organizations, their FDD, they're doing professional human translation, which is one of the services that we provide, by a professional translator that knows that legal content, that knows how to translate. And so what, like I was saying, ultimately when it comes down to it, machine translation, the quality isn't quite there yet to be able to produce what most people would expect out of an FDD or any other legal contract. So most people, and what we try to do is again provide options, keep you in the driver's seat, and just advise you on, you know, best practices of what's going on in the industry. And for legal, it's professional human translation. But I want to go back because AI is just such a hot topic that they're like, can't I just AI translate it or machine translate it? There is a difference. There's machine translation, which I've already touched on, and then there's AI translation, your Chat GTP, your Open AI, things like that. Right now, actually, just last month, there was a great report that came out, and ultimately, and again, I'm going to be a language nerd right here, but there's a difference between that machine translation. So Google Translate, Microsoft Translator, to give you an idea, they're averaging around 92% accuracy. Okay. So it's not horrible, and it's pretty good. But again, out of 100 words, are you okay with having 8 words being completely not what you're expecting or what is actually being said? So that's the risk and reward with that. Very cheap though. On the other side, when you look at AI translation, okay, the nice thing is it's a little bit smoother. It sounds a little bit more like a human, which is great. The problem is the translation is actually more incorrect, and with an 82% accuracy. So you're having a 10% difference there. So as much as everybody's like, oh, it'll just do it, it does some cool stuff because you can say, hey, provide this translation and give it more of a happy tone or a legal tone or a upbeat tone or whatever you want on that aspect, which it kind of does that. The problem is it's not translating it as accurately. So again, both those options very inexpensive, which is great, but it might not get the results that you're looking for to have people have interest in it, or actually represent your product or services as well as what you think.
Yeah, no surprise for me at all. It took them decades to train those engines up to as good as they are now. But there is kind of a hybrid, right? So if someone's like, man, I got to save money, I've got to get it done fast, but they're willing to sacrifice a little bit on overall quality, you can do human intervention after a machine translation, then have real linguists clean it up, right?
Exactly. So we usually talk about four major options. And again, we customize depending on what people are looking for, but this gives people a broad understanding and then they kind of know which direction they want to go. So you have machine translation or AI and translation, which again, in our estimations, I don't think anybody and none of our clients have said, yeah, I want to move with AI translation because I like the translation quality to be even less than what it could be. So that's the first option. Second option is machine translation plus a professional translator going through and editing and cleaning it up. Okay. Typically, at this point, some people, as they read it, they're going to go, oh, okay, because it's pretty clean, but there's going to be a few oddly worded sentences where they're going, I get what they're saying, but why did you say it that way? They probably should have said it this way. That just is what happens when you're trying to clean up a lot of, in a sense, kind of garbage or not great quality translation. Trying to clean that up causes some issues there, but ultimately it does get a little bit better. But most people will probably recognize and go, hey, was this machine translation? Because it made sense, but there were some parts that were a little bit weird. It didn't sound like quite as natural as what it could be. So that's kind of the next level up. And the cost, like Dave, you said, cost goes up a little bit more, but the speed also is a little bit more, but the quality is going to be drastically better when it comes to that. Okay. The next one, the third option is professional human translation. So no machines involved other than on the back end, we call it a CAT tool. Basically, it has the thesauruses, dictionaries, word glossaries, translation memory, which is a fancy term for if we've translated, and actually we'll dive into that a little bit more, translated that sentence or word once, it'll automatically pre-populate it in, saving cost, saving time, and probably one of the biggest things, making sure there's consistency, which is very important for any organization, for any brand. But that's usually the next step up is professional human translation. So that's third. And then the fourth is professional human translation, followed by a secondary review by another professional translator. So most people, again, you're wanting two sets of eyes on something. When you guys write English content, it's probably not, oh, my content writer just wrote it, it's good to go. They're probably having somebody else proof that as well, whether it's a professional editor that's on the team or just somebody outside, because someone else needs to see it with some other eyes. That's typically what we recommend on the legal side if you can do that. But there are plenty of organizations that go, hey, you know what? We hope that it should be fine and it should be good. So let's just go with professional human translation. But again, we just always want to leave people in the driver's seat, let them decide and lay out a little bit more of those pros and cons and those risks and those rewards that come along with that.
Oh yeah, that was a great walkthrough. Most people don't understand that they've got kind of options that you can pull different levers and spit out different quality outcomes. And you can have just a human translator. And if you get, I mean, Kyle's job, his team's job, the value they provide isn't just giving people a great experience and the great smiles and like he's also responsible for recruiting, maintaining, and grooming and training the proper translators for the subject matter. And so I know an area that Kyle's an expert in, and it's something he and I worked on together even previously. He was good at it years ago, so he's just gotten better. Is on learning content, right? And that's like crazy tricky stuff. Where you've got multimedia and print assets and like on-screen digital and audio and like all this stuff that you've got to like get done right and put together. But this is just a good example of like you don't want to machine translate your like video content and then put that on like the subtitles because it'll make your content laughable. So, but this has been a good, just so you know, like the different layers that he's adding. You can create. I came from a background where I was first managing localization of like certification exams in industry for Microsoft and Adobe. That's a big deal. Like we couldn't mess around with quality. Then I went into patent translation for a couple of years. Again, if you're Apple filing a patent for the new iPhone screen, you don't want to mess around with that and limit your patent scope because you screwed up the translation. But then I went into learning and I was like, well, it's almost as critical to get the content right or else you're going to screw up the next generations of people that are trying to do this thing. So it's pretty important. And so I just, lean on a guy like Kyle if you've got a translation project. because he's not going to charge you anything to talk to you about the project and give you some advice about how to approach it. Whether or not you work with him in the end, that's kind of up to you. But he's an asset I want everyone to know in this industry, because he really is going to take care of you. And he's going to be honest with you. Those are things that are hard sometimes to find when you're looking for a good supplier.
We're always looking for good fits, and there's some organization that I'll even recommend and say, hey, this organization might be a little bit better for you. They maybe specialize in that a little bit more, could help you out with that. We're not against doing that. I mean, ultimately, we just want you to have a great experience overall. And we've received referrals from people that didn't work with us because we recommended to other organizations, and we're grateful for that because we know what we specialize in. Dave, you mentioned it. About over 50% of what we do is really in the training world, e-learning world, doing multimedia, things like that. We really specialize in that quite a bit, and so we just feel very geared towards and want to help. I mean, you said it very well, that generation. It's never fun to get trained, and even talking about this, even if you don't need your FDD in Spanish, let's say you're here in the United States, but you're close to the border of Mexico or in other places that you have a high Spanish population, training those employees in their native language is really, really key, because a lot of times people just go, oh, they're a bad employee, they weren't following instructions, but literally there's a language barrier there. And even though their English is good enough to get by that you think they're understanding you, many times, sadly, they're not. And so when you train in their language, there's two main things that you're going to see. One, you're going to see retention rates of those employees drastically go up. And then two, you're going to realize that they do a much better job, because most people want to do a good job. But when they don't fully understand it or they're confused by it, rather than just going and saying, hey, I'm confused, my English is so, they know that's an excuse. And usually it just looks at it and you just kind of determine, like, they're not doing their job really good. We got to get them out of here. Let's just get another employee. Let's just get going in here, And it really just usually comes down to training. And then I'll add one last thing there, Dave. There's a statistic that's been around for literally decades. It's 76%. 76% of people are more likely to buy that service or product when it is in their native language. You might be bilingual, or that customer might be bilingual, or that potential franchisee might be bilingual. But that if it's not their native language, you'd be surprised the sales rates go drastically down with that. And so if you can get it in their native language, that means a big difference and a huge revenue boost for most organizations.
Yeah, and to piggyback on that, I think if I remember right, that there was a relationship between the complexity of the service and the cost of the service and the likely to buy it and the requirement of it to be in the native language. So it might be 93% or something like that if you're talking about a franchise, because it's a major investment. It's a very complicated purchase. So yeah, I mean, I'm not going to be very comfortable if it's a French concept and I'm reading a French FDD. I'm not even going to bother. I will literally move on to the next option. So just to put it into perspective, this is not a simple purchase we're talking about, or it's not a simple training process. Sometimes, like, you want people to be successful. Your owners in Quebec are going to need the training collateral, the training videos, everything in that language so they can effectively train their people. Otherwise, why would they buy? What are they getting?
Yeah. And that's a good point, Dave. That definitely brings into a factor. I'll just share a quick story. I think most people have heard of overstock.com. It's kind of like an Amazon-ish kind of website. Working with them, I mean, ultimately, there is like product names that we'd have human translators go in there because that's pretty important. And then there's small description. But when it came to the girth, the height, the weight, those things like that, that was an awesome example where you could go, let's just do machine translation of that. We can save a massive amount of cost and be able to get the important details. Because how many people are always looking at the height, weight, a bunch of other details that people don't really look at? Probably only maybe 5% of the people actually look at that. And so they thought, hey, and that's what we advise them on. Hey, you could probably save a pretty good amount of cost and speed up things by just having that. But that description of, 3 or 4 paragraphs and then that title, you're going to want to get that professionally translated. And it worked out very well. But yeah, to what you're saying, Dave, some industries, if it's a small, simple, purchase, maybe it doesn't make that big of a deal. But on massive contracts, maybe it's even higher in the 90s or something like that. Who knows? But overall, when we just look across the board, across all industries, 76% is the magic number that's keep on getting repeated decade after decade now.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. I want to talk about another myth. So we talked about myth number one, which is translation's too expensive. I can't afford to do it. Myth number two is machine translation's all I need. Chat GPT is going to take care of me, you know, and we can all smile at that mindset. Hopefully that's phasing out a little bit. But myth number three is, hey, I need this done tomorrow. Translation should be easy, right? You should be able to get that done fast. But Kyle, do you mind maybe breaking down for folks that are listening in, like, what does it take if you have let's say it's a training project that somebody needs to get done through you.
Yeah.
Um, what does it actually take to get that done properly so that the quality is good? You're not just spitting out junk.
Yeah, yeah. Let's go with multimedia with a video. I think I think people get a little bit of the idea. So we'll just talk about real quick that life cycle. So let's say your organization comes to our team, our company, and says, "Hey, looking at getting this training video, or even just this overview video, a couple minutes long. It's only 2 minutes long. Can't you get that to me like tomorrow? Right? It's 2 minutes, right?" Well, there's multiple things that we're going to want to look at. We'll be able to provide you a quote and let you know exactly the cost. But when you say, okay, let's go ahead and move forward, a couple different things that come into play. First and foremost, we need to look at, is that video, do you already have subtitles for it already in that language? Because we need to get it transcribed, or do you have the script for it? Because we need to look at that. So, okay, oh, great, you don't have that. Now we're going to have a transcriptionist to help out to do that. Now, I know ultimately you can upload it to YouTube and you can get a transcript. Now, if there's people's name in there and some other things, you're going to see those box that up. So at worst, you need to at least have that and then do some quality control measures to edit and make some adjustments there, because a lot of times it doesn't turn out the way that you want.
I'll just share an example. Was we've been adding video subtitles of the content with client tether. The client tether doesn't get transcribed properly by anybody. It's always like, you know, it's a couple of different words, or they mess it up. Like, it's never once come through properly. So just and you know, when you talk about things like let's give like Chick-fil-A, for example, that one might, because it's become such a common brand. But if you've got a unique spelling like Burrito Shack, it's never going to spell it with just a K. It's always going to be an S. It's going to be Shack, SHACK. You got to clean that up because that's your brand. So, so again, to Kyle's point, even if you run it through something like that, or an auto generator, an otter.ai or something, you're still going to have a human touch it, because this is going to be on screen displaying your content and your brand. So you want to be careful about that. Carry on, Kyle. I cut you off there.
So we gotta get the script ready, and maybe you already have that, and you go, it's 100% perfect. Now we get to skip through that step. Next step, you're going to have a dedicated, at least in our organization, you're going to have a dedicated project manager. They're the one that's going to review all the files, make sure they have everything ready to go. So when you give the approval, they're like ready to rock and roll. But the other thing is too, is now we have to make sure that we have the proper translator that knows your organization and knows the background. One of the ways that we help out with that is we prepare or help you prepare what we call a translation style guide. It's about 15 questions. It answers some really important questions for us of who's your target audience and where are they located? Because a lot of times you could just say, hey, I need Spanish. Okay, great. We'd love to know a little bit more. A lot of other translation companies will be like, okay, Spanish, good to go. We need to know, like, where are they located? Are you trying to have like your franchise go to Mexico? Or are you trying to have it go to Spain? Or are you having to go to Argentina? Those dialects of Spanish are all very different, and how you'll translate something are going to be different, even though they're all Spanish. Good example, here in the United States and in Mexico, sometimes they call a truck a troco, but in Argentina and other places, they're going to call it a camioneta. And so, very different on how you translate things, do that. If you're in Argentina and you hear troco, they're going to be like, what are you talking about? I think they're talking about a vehicle. I'm not sure,
Oh,
So,
yeah.
knowing your dialect, knowing your target audience is really important.
Let me share a little bit on that too, just because Spanish is such a big one, and this is where people screw it up a lot. It's very common. And so when I was learning Spanish, I was speaking to someone, and I speak more of a Mexican dialect. It's smoothed out now. Most people think it's like Chilean or something else. It's more neutral. But I was speaking with a lot of Mexican terminology, and this lady from Spain, she was like, "Look, kid, you don't speak Spanish. You speak Mexican." And she was like really mad at me. It's similar to like if you had a video and you were trying to sell to a bunch of people, like high-end buyers in New York, and you had some like, and there's nothing wrong with this. This is just like there's some funky like perceptions, but you had like a Southern drawl, like maybe a less educated Southern drawl, like as a rural Texan doing the video. The folks in like Manhattan would be like, dude, y'all are idiots. But they wouldn't say y'all, they would say, you gentlemen are all idiots, right? But they don't speak the same in Connecticut as they do down in Texas. And so it's why most news anchors are trying to recruit people from the Pacific Northwest. That's a neutral tone and dialect in English. You don't even know this, right? But most news anchors speak the same because they're all from the same part of the country generally. But that's where they train them to speak with that dialect, even in English, except for the local news folks because they don't care. But
Yeah.
but that's a problem. So if you were to translate something in Spain Spanish and then drop it into Latin America, they'd be like, in like Mexico, they'd say, what the heck is this? They're like, oh, you think you're better than me because you're speaking Castilian Spanish. If you did the opposite though, they'd be like, this is pig Spanish. Like they're really looked down upon like the Mexican dialect of Spanish. So you need to talk to a guy like Cyle to like really understand culturally what are you trying to get done in what part of the world, because you can definitely translate into the wrong brand of Spanish.
And we don't, and I'll say this much, Dave, we don't try to bore our clients. Some people really care about that and they're like, oh, I'm so glad you're touching on it. Some other people, they're just like, can you just translate it? And we get that. So that's why it's just 15 questions. If you answer these 15 questions, we're going to be good to go. Other questions in there that are really important. What education level are you trying to, like, who is your target audience and what education level? Maybe you have a franchise where you're going, sixth grade reading level is what we need. We need it really simple and plain. Well, we need to understand that. You might think that you're doing that in English. Your translator, if they don't understand and they're not clear on that, they might be doing a little bit too high at that. On the same time, if you're trying to go to, your franchise is more B2B or something like that, and you're really trying to talk to educated people, you're going to want a college, level reading level, or even maybe even PhD, depending on what you're doing. So knowing those things are really, really helpful for us. Target audience, who you're talking to, things like that. And those are all clearly, it's just a one-page document that we get that clarity from. So we set that up, and then it's assigning the correct translator as well too. We look at background or anything like that. We have thousands of translators that we've gone through, vetted, and many of them we worked with for years. And so ultimately it's making sure that they know how to translate your content and giving the correct representation of your organization. So now they're translating it. That's great. We got there. But now maybe the next step, if it's a video and you guys want professional voiceover on it, we got to find the right voiceover artist. So we give you a couple different options of some people that we think are good. So we're going to give you those samples and you go, I don't know, I don't speak Spanish. That guy sounds good. Or maybe you have somebody in your organization that does speak Spanish that you're like, let me just send it over to them. And oh, you like this person? Sounds great, And so now we have the voiceover artist that needs to go and record actually that. Then we have audio engineers afterwards that are going to lay that over and make sure it's lining up, because maybe someone's actually talking in your video. And so you kind of want to lip sync it and get as close as you can to that so it looks professional, looks good. Then also maybe you actually want the subtitles on the bottom. Some organizations do, some organizations don't. So we're finally getting to that. So you can see multiple steps here, and it's not all done in one day. There's a lot of coordination that our project managers are doing with a lot of different people within our organization to make sure it produces. Now, on a 2-minute video, realistically, if you said, how long is that going to take? Probably at most a week to get done. And maybe at the fastest, maybe 3, maybe 4 days. And that's if you're doing rush and paying a little bit extra for that. So it can be done very quickly, but depending on what your term of a quickly is, the best thing is get in touch with, whether it's our translation company or another translation company, but get in touch with people early, get an idea of what budgets are, get an idea of what timelines are. Don't wait to the last minute where you're like, oh crap, my boss said, or we gotta jump into this, we gotta do it, because it's not going to get done as quickly as you think. And again, when you move fast, we always talk to companies about this. When you start moving really quick, same thing with you, going into a new market or a new state or anything else, or really just trying to get things launched and going. If you move fast, typically, or too fast of what you're comfortable with, typically it might not turn out the way that you want it to. So get in touch early.
Yeah, and I want to share a thought on that. What a lot of people don't understand is that a human translator has a capacity to even with this technology go through about 2,000 words a day that need to be translated. Depends on the language. Some can go a little faster, maybe 2,200 for Spanish, 1,800 for Japanese, right? It's some of the more complex languages it takes more time. So if you've got a 200-page document, and that's about, let's say, 400 words per page, something like that. What is that? 80,000 words in an FA, a franchise agreement. I mean, put that into perspective. If you say, hey, I need that done in 2 weeks, well, Kyle's going to say, well, we can do that, but we're going to have to find 2 sets of translators and reviewers that have expertise in legal terms and fast food, because these, you guys are fast food concepts. We need to make sure they understand those. Those are very specialized people, and they're gonna have two sets of them working in parallel to get that done. They could do 40,000 words, 20 days, 20 working days each. That's 4 weeks with two sets of teams working on that document. So
Yeah.
you have to also, like he's saying, get engaged early, because you don't realize this, but the quality that you need for some of those key documents, or for your whole training package that has 30 modules and each one has 2 videos, and like all, you're talking about some time that's just going to elapse, because you have to get stage 1 done to pass it to stage 2, and you've got 30 of those going through a cycle. So again, that's where strategies that needs to be in place of, well, what are the most critical things? Well, we can get the introductory and the first 3 onboarding video like modules done first. And by the time that those are delivered, you'll have someone on the front end working through those modules. We can be delivering now module 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 kind of in sequence before they'd even get to them.
Yep.
I've done projects like that with Cyle before with clients. So to deliver almost like just in time delivery to make sure we get it done, because they didn't plan enough in advance. But again, strategize with somebody like Cyle, because you'll need to figure those things out if you're running short on time.
Yeah, rolling deliveries are very common, particularly in the training industry, because everybody says, I need it all right now. They don't actually need it all right now, because no one can consume all that content all right now. But when you make up and when you think through it, and you talk with us, and maybe there are definitely times when they do need it all right now, because people are starting at different modules or things like that. But anyways, yeah, rolling deliveries are very common. And then Dave, just kind of touch on that, and people go, well, why can't they just put like 8 people on the translation there? You can, but ultimately you're going to run into some what we call consistency issues. Now, I'm betting when they created that FDD, they didn't go, hurry, just create it and just have, like, I don't know, 8 different lawyers create their different sections and throw it all together, right? Like, it should be good, right? It doesn't really work out very well. People are going to say, no, you can't really do that. You need the same person, or at least the same smaller team or something like that. And then we're going to have to go through additional review processes, and it's going to take more time. And so it doesn't happen magically in the sense of just add more people. As in anything, when you add a lot more people, there's a lot more potential of risk for things to go wrong or not be consistent, or be what you need it to be.
Oh yeah, it's called Frankenstone, right? Or Frankenstyle or Frankentone, right? It's like the style and tone is like just a hodgepodge of randomness throughout, and it's obvious, right? If you're reading a newspaper and you like go from article to article to article, they're all news writers, and yet they all sound completely different in the way they approach the content. So if you're ever curious about what we're talking about, just read a paper if you can get your hands on one ever again. But it's you don't want that in a contract or in your training experience. You don't want to have like 4 different voices that are merging across a single module. Even module by module, it's a little funny if it's like a totally different style of delivery when you go from each one. So if you're going to do that, best to do it in a way that naturally compartmentalizes, like a training module or like a training section where you've got 3 or 4 modules on legal stuff. It's okay if that has a consistent tone that's different than the consistent tone on marketing, that's consistent, like or the operations training. But you got to be very, very specific about those things, so you don't have a weird delivery experience for your people.
Exactly.
So Cyle, so we've talked about 3 major myths: turnaround time, costs, and also machine translation, which we need to talk about, which is kind of a quality discussion. So I think we've touched on enough throughout each one of these different sections where we've talked about quality takes time, it takes technology, it takes people. Like those 3 things kind of are required. Anything else you'd want to share with people as they talk about, like, how can we maximize quality without breaking the bank? That's kind of a big question.
Yeah. I want to bring up a topic that if you say this as you're looking, or maybe you're already in multiple countries and you're going, okay, great, we already got a translation company, they kind of handle that stuff or whatever. Or on the other side, you go, hey, we actually have an in-house guy that he translates all our stuff and does that. He has some other jobs too, but we have him do the translating into Spanish on some of the stuff. And if you're doing that and that works out, then fantastic. One of the things I want to bring up is the technology side. There is technology actually called translation memory. I mentioned before about what we call a CAT tool. It's basically the platform that you upload whatever you're going to translate, and it's looking at all those words, and then for the translator, it has that thesaurus, the dictionary, the other tools in there. And one of the things that will be in there is, or hopefully they should have, if they're using that, is translation memory. So if you think, hey, I'm just sending over a Word document to a guy that in our organization that speaks Spanish, that he translates that's great. But when it's something massive, in your FDD, you're going to have repetition. Things are going to repeat in there. And that person's having to retranslate that. But what happens if if he forgets that, oh, that was on page 8 and I'm on page 44 now. I thought I translated something like that, but he translated it different. That can cause some consistency issues. Not to mention, he's spending more time, and regardless of how you're looking at it, whether it's their time that you're paying them for because they're a salary employee, or you're sending it over to a translation company, but they're not doing that. They're just like, hey, I'm just trying to get it done, and they're not leveraging that. That's causing you a lot of cost and issue and consistency issue. We leverage translation memory, which is a huge cost savings because you're going to see it. And what you'll see in our quotes is you'll see here's the total cost, how many words that need to get translated, and how many of them are repeating in there. And that's going to be a dollar amount that takes off that total amount there. So there's cost savings. A lot of translation companies, if they do use that, you get a discounted rate. How nice for them to discount that. Instead of charging you, 20 cents per word, they're only charging you 5 cents per word. We don't do that. We provide all those cost savings to you. That's technology working the way that it should. And we're not going to nickel and dime you over that. We're going to go, great, you have cost savings and time savings and quality savings in that aspect. And so that's what we do.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Yeah, these are some of the dirty little secrets of the translation industry that Kyle. That's one thing I like about him. Why I wanted him on here is he doesn't play the games that I used to see. I mean, it makes it easier to win deals. I'll just say that. I remember winning several deals because people were getting dishonest quotes and like, wait, why am I paying for this? I'm like, I don't know. Why are you paying for that? And all of a sudden, like, I'm the good guy just because I'm being honest. And so, anyway, I've always kind of lived that way. And Kyle's the same sort of a guy. So, but those are things that you should be taking into account that help you save money. And he's spot on. FAs, franchise disclosure documents, even in training, you're going to have similar phrases you're going to say all the time in your marketing collateral on your website. They're going to be on your brochure and on your website, and then your FDD. If you've worked with the same company, or let's say you worked with a company that did translation for you before, you don't like them, they should be able to take that translation memory, your glossaries, lift them out and give them to a guy like Kyle, and then he can plug those into his tech stack, and then he can take advantage of all the previous translations you've paid for already. So nobody owns your translation memory but you, unless you've specifically signed an agreement that says that they own it. If you have, I'm sorry you screwed up, but don't you got to pay attention to things. If you're getting a contract from a translation company where they're trying to lock you in, usually not a great sign, just so you know.
We work on a project by project basis, and so you're not locked into anything. That's how and so we're only as good as our last translation. That's what we always talk about. And hopefully most people can relate to that and go, yeah, I want people to have like a good service. I don't want to feel like they have to get locked in anything. Like, we know our service adds value to their organization. And so that's the way that we view it. Dave, I want to touch on something that's actually, since you've been out of the industry for a little bit now, something that's very big, and I want to make sure that these people know this as they're looking at translation, because they go, okay, great, let me see about Transcend. And and my advice, go get other quotes. Don't just rely only on us. Go get other quotes. And what you're going to see, you're probably going to see some pretty good price discrepancy, because something that's been interesting in the industry, you're going to say, hey, I need this translated. Okay. Now, we talked about those 4 different styles of translation: machine translation, and then a human cleaning it up, professional human translation just with one translator, and then translation with a secondary review by a professional translator. So you have to be clear in that, because you might get a quote from us or for another organization that says, hey, it'll cost you 20 cents per word, okay, to translate. And then you go to another one and they say, oh, 12 cents per word. And you're going, wow, this company's just way cheaper. I got to go with them. Like, this cost is different. Translation, as I talk about those 4 different ones, keep that in your mind. And so you might need to specifically say, hey, I want professional human translation, no machine translation involved, no AI translation involved. And then that way you can get specific quotes for them of exactly what their cost is, because you're probably going to see not a huge disparity in price difference in that. If you clarify and say, hey, I'm looking for option, in a sense, option number 3 there. I'm not looking for option 2, which maybe is 12 cents. And so it just depends on what quality level, and talk to them, have that conversation, or, hey, can you just tell me a little bit more about your different translation options that you have? And if someone doesn't give you that, and they're just saying, yeah, it's just translation, I bet you they're going to come with a really cheap price, and it's going to sound nice, but I'm going to tell you the quality is probably not going to be where you're at. And so, again, we're trying to always advise people, give those options, lay through those, talk about their specific content, but just be aware as you get different quotes, and that's what I recommend. Understand exactly and make sure you're comparing apples to apples. One of the nice things that we do, Dave, we do a price match guarantee. So if you know exactly the quality and it says exactly what it is on the quote, we're going to price match that. But typically, one of the things, we're very competitive with price. So it does happen every once in a while, but a lot of times people go, look, you said 20 cents a word, and they're 12 cents a word. And right there, you can tell there's a big disparity. And we always say, great, if you feel good with that, move forward with them. But I can tell you what quality level you're going to get, and you might not be happy with it. And we've had, sadly, some of those people go, crap, I wasted all that money, and now I'm coming back to you guys because it wasn't done the way that it needed to be done.
Yeah, and sometimes you got to scrap it. It's like someone building an addition on your house that's not up to code. Tear it down, build it right. I mean, sometimes you got to do that if you go down the wrong path in translation.
Yeah.
Kyle, this is super helpful. And I think this is exactly what I wanted, honestly. Like, I wanted people just to understand, like, when they start moving into that direction, what are they up against, and how do they navigate this industry, and how do they make sure they focus on the right projects and focus on bite-sized pieces first, and not try to eat the whole elephant. Any other advice for folks as they're looking at maybe globalizing their franchise concept and getting into different markets? I'd love some insights from you, kind of parting thoughts.
Yeah, I think we've already kind of touched on things, but I just want to reiterate them again. Like you said, take things bite size, move slow into it. You can do these things for a few $100s. We've had some organizations literally $100 got them going where they needed to go, and then they're like, "Ooh, this is actually turning out something." And then they just invested a few more $100s, and then they said, "Okay, yeah, we're going to invest a couple $1,000s now." And it's great. I love to see that progression in that size. So take bite size, like what you're saying. The other thing is, I want to go back, and maybe I'm beating a dead horse on the training side. I think most people, the far majority of people, want to do a good job, but if they're not communicating in truly their language, it can go sideways, it can go south. And no one wants to, and everybody knows your organization is going to be a little bit different on the exact dollar amount, but to fire an employee and then rehire and retrain that person, there's dollars attached to that. And what if you could say, hey, instead of having a 60% retention rate, now we have a 90% retention rate. What does that 30% difference dollar wise mean for your organization? And so again, you can compare and contrast that. You're going to know, your HR side is going to know a little bit more on that side of what that is. But at the same time, if you said, hey, what if I only spent a quarter of that cost of that 30% difference and put it towards translation, what would that produce? And I can very much say, after working with hundreds of organizations, it produces great results where they're going, wow, we got better employees than I thought. And it makes you feel happier. And especially as an owner of a franchise as well, too, they're going to feel very good. And there's a lot better things that you can put in that FDD when you're sharing your numbers and statistics there.
Yeah, that's great. And staffing is one of the biggest challenges in most of the service industry brands that I work with. They're trying to figure out, how do I hire and retain people at a higher rate? And so this may be a solution if you've got an omnilingual environment where not everybody's a native English speaker. That's really good advice. Guys, Cyle Adair, best way, he's available on LinkedIn. Kyle, how else should people look you up if they want to find you and get some advice?
I'm actually okay if they want to shoot me an email. I put it in your notes there. Cyle, so it's spelled Cyle, so spelled a little bit different. We go back to that automated, the text. I know it's going to show up if Dave's using that Otter AI or whatever. It's going to show up with a K, and that's okay, But it's cyle@transcendtranslation.com. And my hope is I'd love to be able to be involved as much as I can, but most likely I'll have a sales rep kind of help out as well too, kind of coach you along. But I love to be involved. Dave and I have been friends for years, and so I love to be involved with that. And I love the franchise industry. Dave knows I've looked at multiple translations, or not translations, multiple franchises as being an investor myself as well too. And so I love the world, and I love getting to talk to Dave and catch up with him on the many different organizations that he gets to meet with as well too. So.
Yeah, well, Kyle, thanks for joining us. I sure appreciate you dumping all the wisdom on us in this episode. And guys, reach out to Kyle if you need help. He genuinely means that. He'll spend some time with you and get somebody on the team to help coach you if you need help. So thanks again, Kyle.
Great. Thanks, Dave.